Our final honoree, Robert D. Kaplan, is an award-winning journalist and author who first visited Romania in the 1970s. Many of us encountered his insights for the first time in his wonderful tour of villains and heroes of Southeast Europe, Balkan Ghosts, or in one of his other books of travel and history, or in his journalistic analysis in publications including The Atlantic, The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Washington Post. Foreign Policy magazine has named him one of the world's top 100 global thinkers. Next year, Robert D. Kaplan plans to publish his 16th book titled In Europe's Shadow: Two Cold Wars and a 30-Year Journey Through Romania and Beyond. Expect to be gripped by his analysis of the postmodern forces shaping Europe: imperialism, the Holocaust, the Cold War. Mark?
Thank you so much for this award. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here. Thanks for the wonderful words, and particularly for the wonderful words from Ambassador Mayor, who I had the pleasure to visit in Romania. As was said, my experience, my really deep, intensive experience in Romania began in November 1981. When I left the Middle East and arrived in Ceausescu's Bucharest with long bread lines. It was like the camera went from Technicolor to grainy black and white. And I realized that I was in history, because this, in terms of human suffering and deprivation, was the front line of the Cold War, which was really the signal struggle of our age. And I kept going back and forth to Romania up until now, essentially. Balkan Ghosts was a very dark book, because the Romania I saw after 44 years of communism, literally a few weeks after Ceausescu was overthrown, was a very difficult place. The new book that I will publish in February is a very uplifting and positive book, because the country has changed and I've changed over the years. What I'd like to do is, just with the few minutes, I have, is to give you just a few words about how I see Central and Eastern Europe now, what the problems are and the challenges, and how Romania has been doing. If you were in Romania, or Poland for that matter, and Romania really is the Poland of Southeast Europe. It's the pivot state. Like, if you think of Poland in Northeast Europe, Romania in Southeast Europe, and oil-rich and gas-rich Azerbaijan and the Caucasus, you have the three pivot states anchoring the area between the Baltic and Black Seas, the traditional intermarium that faces off against traditional Russia. If you were in Romania in 1995, say, or Poland, the world looked wonderful, because you were getting into NATO. NATO looked perfect. That had no problems on the horizon. You were going to get eventually into the European Union, which had no problems at all on the horizon at the time. And Russia was conveniently weak, helpless, and chaotic under Boris Yeltsin's semi-competent rule. So you felt that you had escaped history. All your problems were behind you. Fast forward 20 years, and now you have a NATO that is, I would argue, directionless. You have an EU that's already in 5 or 6 years of systemic structural crisis. And you have Russia, which is led now by a very competent, focused geopolitical thinker, who's really gathered all the means of power into himself and his few advisors. And so Romania is back in history with real challenges. However, there's a really bright side here. Romania has avoided all of the catastrophes of its neighbors. It did not dissolve into war like Yugoslavia. It did not have bouts of anarchy like Albania and Bulgaria in the 1990s. Its economy did not collapse like Greece. And it's somewhat off the refugee route because of geography. It's a bit too far to the east and the right, so to speak. And so, in fact, the Romanian economy is going to grow by 3% or so this year. That's not great, but for Europe, that's very good. So Romania, in the last 25 years, though people complain all the time, has essentially had one of the most normal, happiest periods of its history, if you go back several hundred years. The rule of law is more and more established. It's uneven. It's a zigzag line, but more and more. I remember in the 1990s, only the cities were really bubbling with capitalist development. Now the deepest parts of the countryside exhibit modern agriculture, new roads, new gas stations, wineries, bee farms, etc. So I think there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot to be optimistic about, actually, as we go forward. Just keep in mind that the 21st century postmodern brand of Russian imperialism is not the army or tanks. It's subversion, it's buying media by third parties, it's bribing local politicians, it's a pharaonic network of gas pipelines. It's a very subtle, oblique form of imperialism. But Romania is doing well. It does not have a pro-Russian party. It's been an exemplary member of NATO in terms of modernizing its military. I think so. Despite all these problems and these tensions and the deterioration in general for the security situation in Central Eastern Europe, I think if Romania has another quarter century of the last quarter century, it will really emerge as a major, bubbling hothouse of stability and capitalist development. Thank you so much.